Good morning students. Today we are going to learn about the lesson respiration, the energy releasing system. So this is your second lesson in the biology. So we will go what are the important topics covered in this lesson. So first we will see about the introduction part. So the respiration, actually in the first lesson nutrition you learn about how the food molecules are digested and how the digested food molecules are transported to your all body cells. But in this lesson we learn how the different food molecules are converted to energy. Here the respiration means the process for breakdown of food molecules to release energy is known as respiration. So what are the food molecules getting after digestion are broken down in the presence of oxygen to release energy in the cells. That process is known as respiration. So first of all, the term respiration derived from a Latin word known as respire. Respire means to breathe. So what we thought means respiration means simply just breathing, inhalation and exhalation of gases, but that is not the correct concept. So the breathing is one of the part in the respiration. Respiration actually linked up with the energy releasing from the food molecules in the cells. So two scientists already know about it. Priestley and Lavoisier were the two scientists who did a comprehensive work on the discovery of gases and exchange of gases and how the respiration goes on. They carried different experiments to know these all topics. So in that Lavoisier, on heating powdered charcoal, a gas nothing but CO2 was released, and at that time the CO2 was called as the fixed air, and at that time O2 is it is also called vitiated air, means the expenditure air. So the next one, pathway of air. Before going to pathway of air, first we see the respiratory system in the humans. So first of all, students, all of you look at this. This is your human respiratory system. So your respiratory system first starts with the nostrils, and the space inside the nose we called as nasal cavity. After that a larynx. That larynx is also known as voice box. Why it is called as voice box I will tell. And trachea. Trachea is also known as windpipe. So nostrils, nasal cavity, larynx, trachea, next lungs. Again, what are the different parts of lungs? I will say that here I forgot to write a small thing, that is pharynx. So nostrils, nasal cavity, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, and these all small chambers are nothing but alveoli. This is about your respiratory system. So here I written how the air, once you inhale, how the air will go through the different parts of respiratory system. First simply we inhale the air with the nostrils. So after that the air entered into the nasal cavity. So once you carefully observe that the inner lining of your nasal cavity is lined with a small hair and mucous membrane. These small hairs help to trap the dust particles what are present inside the air you inhale, and the mucous lining and the mucous membrane is very helpful to bring the temperature of air what we inhale to the equal to the body's temperature. Even though the outer air, atmospheric air, maybe it is hot in nature, once we inhale, before it going into the lungs, it is brought into our body temperature with the help of the mucus secreted by the mucous membrane in the nasal cavity. And the dust is here, the dust particles are filtered by the hair and mucous membrane in the nasal cavity. And the third one, pharynx, we already discussed about this in nutrition lesson also. Here pharynx is the common passage for both food and air. So once what the air you inhale and what the food you are taken, both pass through the pharynx, and at the pharynx only, from the pharynx only they both take separate routes, means the air entered into the larynx and trachea and the food is entered into food pipe. So that's why we said that pharynx is the common passage. The next one coming to larynx. So here in the pharynx, the epiglottis is one of the important structure, help to epiglottis control the movement of food and air into their respective passages. Epiglottis is a flap-like structure. Once we are eating the food, it just closes the windpipe and larynx so that the food does not enter into the larynx and windpipe. So at normal time the epiglottis is open. That's why what is the air we are taking simply entered into larynx and trachea. Okay na? Then next coming to larynx. So the larynx is made up of number of vocal cords. So vocal cords are nothing but muscles which are helpful to produce different sounds while speaking or while singing. So what are the different sounds produced by us? We able to produce only with the help of the vocal cord muscles in the larynx. That's why we specially call larynx as either voice box or sound box. The next coming to after that larynx, if you just touch your neck, you feel that a small tube like structure that we called as trachea or windpipe. This trachea or windpipe, it just run along with your neck, and this trachea or windpipe made up of small C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Cartilage means you already know that it is the soft bone. The trachea is whole of its length is made up of C-shaped cartilaginous rings. These rings help to protect the windpipe when there is air. These rings help to protect the windpipe from the collapsing. The next one coming to bronchus. And once the trachea, when it enter into the lungs, it is divided into two separate structures we called as bronchi. Each one we called as bronchus, and plural both together we called as bronchi. And here these two bronchi will lead into the two different lungs. We have a pair of lungs now. So these two bronchi will enter into the two lungs. And once they enter into the lungs, each bronchi again separated into further divisions or smallest branches we called as bronchioles. What we call bronchioles. So after that the bronchioles finally enter into the lungs. So coming to when we talk about the lungs, lungs are very spongy and elastic in nature. Lungs are spongy and elastic nature. Just how you feel when you touch a sponge, in the same way the lungs are very soft, spongy, and they are able to elastic in their nature. And the lungs are actually protected by two-layered membrane we called as pleura. So how the cardiac membrane protects the heart from the injuries and shocks, in the same way the pleura and the liquid present in the pleura membrane help to protect the lungs from the injuries. And next one, each lung, if you just carefully observe, that means compared to the both the lungs in your body are not similar in size actually. Why? Because if you compare with the right lung, the left lung is little bit smaller and little bit smaller. Why? Because means it just provides space for your heart. So your heart, where it is situated at what side means, obviously the heart is located at left side of your body. That's why to provide space for the heart, that left lung is slightly smaller. And after that each lung is divided into smallest chambers and smallest clusters we called as alveoli. So if you observe that each lung a million number of air sacs are present, that air sacs are actually we called as alveoli, and singular we called as alveolus. Very very important. Why? Because what the air we are inhaling from the nostril, it just passes through these all routes and finally entered into lungs. But actually what is the purpose for we are taking the air means just for exchange of oxygen into your body and to expel the carbon dioxide. So here that actual exchange takes place in the smallest air sacs known as alveoli or alveolus singular. So after that, from that alveolus, finally the oxygen what we inhale entered into the blood to the blood capillaries. Now here see actually what happened during respiration. So I already told to you what is the mechanism of respiration. So mainly the respiration involving two processes. The first one we called as inhalation or inspiration, means just taking in air, and the second one we called as exhalation or expiration, means simply expel out or throwing out the air. So first one during inhalation, actually before going to learn about these two processes, first we have to get the idea about how the chest cavity is made up of. So the space below the neck and up to abdomen we called as chest cavity. Even we also called it as thoracic cavity, and inside the thoracic cavity actually our lungs are located, and the chest wall is made up of different muscles and the bones we also known as ribs. the rib cage, different muscles, these all are made together the chest wall. And if we just imagine your chest cavity as a room, the floor of the chest cavity we called as a special muscle known as diaphragm. What we call means diaphragm. So diaphragm is the muscular layer which is present at the floor of the chest cavity, and the diaphragm plays a very major role in the process of respiration. So at the normal time, the diaphragm is in dome shape, and means at the relaxed state the diaphragm is in dome shape and the swollen part is situated inside the chest cavity. So during the inhalation process, means inhalation means simply we are taking in the air. During the inhalation process, the chest wall is moves upside and expands. So because of, at the same time, for example, this is your chest cavity. At normal time, the diaphragm, the muscular sheet is in dome shape. Because of that, the volume of the chest cavity, because of that, at normal time the diaphragm is in dome shape, but during contraction the diaphragm become flattens. That's why what happened means the volume of the chest cavity increases. So carefully remember that at normal time diaphragm is in dome shape, means during relaxation state, but whenever it contracts, the dome shaped diaphragm become flattened. So it lead to the increase in the space of the chest cavity, it increase in the volume of the chest cavity. Whenever the volume of chest cavity increases, the pressure inside the lungs will decreases. Because of that, air from the outside rushes into the lungs. So it helps to take the air. But the reverse happen during the exhalation process. During the exhalation process, from the flattened shape, the diaphragm again become to its dome shape. So at the same time, chest wall also moves inward and down. So these all changes lead to decrease in the space of the chest cavity. So because of that, the pressure inside the lungs become more, and air from inside the lungs will be thrown out or will be pushed to the outside. So these two changes happens. During exhalation process, chest walls move downward and diaphragm relaxes, means it becomes its original dome shape. Volume of the chest cavity decreases. So you carefully remember these changes, what happens during inhalation and exhalation. And here ribs means you know that a set of muscles which are placed in chest cavity. Here coming to women's, during respiration mechanism, ribs plays an important role. Many times he asked that bit during respiration. Coming to women's, ribs plays major role, but coming to men, diaphragm plays a major role. During respiration, ribs plays major role in women's and diaphragm plays major role in men. And I already told you the pleura, the membrane surrounds the lungs, and here actually gas exchange takes place between blood capillaries and the alveoli. So the lungs are made up of number of the air sacs we called as alveoli. So the air from the trachea, bronchi and bronchioles finally enter into the alveoli. So this is, for example, this is one alveoli. This alveoli is surrounded by the tiny blood capillaries or tiny blood vessels known as blood capillaries. So from the air, the oxygen what we inhale will be entered into the blood capillaries. At the same, why? Because means our cells already utilizes more oxygen. So the blood is deficient of oxygen than compared to the air present in the alveoli. Because of that, by the diffusion process, oxygen will be entered into the blood capillaries. At the same time, what the blood brought by the capillaries from collected by different cells, the CO2 will be entered into the alveoli from blood capillaries. Means from alveoli, oxygen will be diffused into the blood capillaries, and from the blood capillaries CO2 will be diffused into alveoli, and again it passes the reverse route, CO2 from alveolus, bronchioles, bronchi, trachea, and finally through nostril it is expelled out. Then here one pigment, already we discussed this pigment even in previous lesson also. Here the pigment, why? Because our blood is red in color, means you know that is hemoglobin, a red color pigment present in the red blood cells. In its structure resembles with the chlorophyll molecule, but the hemoglobin contain iron as the center atom and chlorophyll contain magnesium as the central atom. So once the oxygen will be entered into the blood capillaries, once the oxygen will entered from alveoli to the blood in the blood capillaries, immediately the hemoglobin of the blood molecules, blood cells will be combined with the oxygen to form a special compound known as oxyhemoglobin. So the oxygen simply combined with the hemoglobin to form a molecule known as oxyhemoglobin. This oxyhemoglobin transported via the blood and finally it reaches to the cells. Again the reverse equation will happen. At the cell stage, oxyhemoglobin again it separates into hemoglobin and oxygen. Hemoglobin will remain in the blood, that oxygen will be entered into the each cells for the process of cellular respiration. But most of the thought that the oxygen, the hemoglobin is a molecule which combines only with the oxygen, but that is not correct. Actually, hemoglobin show more affinity towards oxygen, means it mostly it have more chance to combine with oxygen, but at the same time even it combines with the carbon dioxide also. Hemoglobin most of the times he asked in the bits, hemoglobin transport only oxygen, carbon dioxide, both. Your answer is both. Why? Because hemoglobin help to transport oxygen and O2 and CO2, oxygen and carbon dioxide, but it have more attraction or more affinity towards oxygen, that way most amount of oxygen is transported. Coming to CO2, in that CO2 most amount of transported in the form of bicarbonates and some amount with the combined with the hemoglobin or Hb, and remaining a little bit amount of CO2 is dissolved in the blood plasma also. So now we see what are the different percentage of gases in the inhaled air and exhaled air. Inhaled air means what the air we are taking, exhaled air means what the air we are leaving. Coming to oxygen, in that inhaled air percentages are nothing but what are the different gases percentages in atmospheric. Oxygen in the inhaled air it is 21%, but our cells uses most of the oxygen. So in the exhaled air the percentage of oxygen is 16%. Coming to CO2, in the inhaled air it is 0.04%, but our cells continuously by the cellular respiration they release energy, at the same time CO2 was also produced. That's why here the concentration of CO2 rises in the exhaled air. Coming to nitrogen, it is not utilized by cells actually, that's why it remains constant even in the inhaled air and exhaled air. Then our lungs, actually we are using very little amount of our lung capacity. So if you observe the lung capacity, nearly the total lung capacity means how much amount of air filled with the filled by lungs means it is 5800 ml. But at rest, at normal time, just we inhale or we exhale nearly approximately 500 ml of air. But after complete exhalation, still how much air remains in lungs means it is 1200 ml. It is just 1200 ml. And if you go for heights, for example, if you just climb at the hill region, obviously after some time you feel very thirsty and you just suffocates. Here what's the reason behind it means, from compared to the sea level, if you go for height, the concentration of oxygen will be decreases. So from sea level, if we go for 13 kilometers height, the oxygen level is 1/5, means 1/5 level only oxygen is present at the 13 kilometers high. If you just go still height means still the oxygen concentration will be decreases. That is the only reason when we are going to hill regions or any height regions, we just suffocates and we are suffered with breathing problem, means the oxygen concentration is not up to the mark what the actual cells utilize. And here the very important process, listen, it is cellular respiration. So respiration means actually it includes 5 stages. In the respiration, first stage, that is nothing but breathing, simply by inhaling oxygen and exhaling carbon dioxide, and after that gases transport between the alveoli and blood capillaries. So after that the oxygen from the blood capillaries will be transported to the cells, and again one more exchange is also takes place, that is between the blood exchange of gases between the blood capillaries and our body cells. Last stage of respiration is nothing but cellular respiration, the most important process. Cellular respiration process means simply the respiration, cellular respiration, how we define the cellular respiration means the breaking down of food molecules to release energy at the cellular level. That's why we call it as cellular respiration. And here if we want to get energy from food molecule, definitely the food molecule should be combusted or should be combined with the oxygen, and in that process only energy is released. But that is occurred at each and every cell of the all animals and humans. So that process we called as cellular respiration. And here the cellular respiration means I already told to you breaking down of food molecules to release energy. Cellular respiration in the prokaryotes means like bacteria or lower organisms. In the prokaryotes, the cellular respiration takes place cytoplasm of the cell. Why? Because the prokaryotes does not have any well organized cell organelles like mitochondria, chloroplast, these all. But coming to eukaryotes in the cell they specifically have all type of cell organelles which are bounded by membranes. In the eukaryotes, the cellular respiration, it takes place half part in the cytoplasm, and the remaining most of the portion is occurred at the cell organelle known as, in 9th class you already studied mitochondria. So here mitochondria is the place where cellular respiration, but coming to prokaryotes it occurs only in the cytoplasm. So what is the energy released by cells in the cellular respiration? That is stored in a special chemical molecule known as ATP, means adenosine triphosphate. So each ATP molecule further gives nearly 7200 calories of energy. And here small flow chart. So at normal time, for example, if the respiration want to take in place, it must need oxygen. But most of the organisms use oxygen for the respiration process. But even some organisms like bacteria and yeast cells, they produce energy even without oxygen also. So now we go through that. Actually, I already told you, glucose here in any organism, glucose is the first molecule. Glucose is the molecule which is going in the oxidation or respiration process. In the first stage of respiration, glucose actually oxidized in two stages. In the first stage, glucose converted into a 3-carbon compound molecule known as pyruvate or pyruvic acid. So this particular step we termed as glycolysis. What we termed glycolysis? Glycolysis means, lysis means breakdown, glyco means glucose. In the first stage, glucose breakdown into a 3-carbon compound known as pyruvate. For example, if there is sufficient amount of oxygen, that pyruvate molecule break down into CO2, water, and large amount of energy is released. Very, very important. If the glucose is oxidized in the presence of oxygen, energy is released. Even in the absence of oxygen also energy released. But what might be the difference means, if it is oxidized in the presence of oxygen means very large amount of energy released, but in the absence of oxygen means very little bit amount of energy released. Everywhere energy was released, but the amount only makes the difference. So here in the presence of oxygen, the respiration takes place that we call as aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration. So in the aerobic respiration, the final products are CO2, water, and a large amount of energy. It takes place in all higher animals including humans. But when there is either low oxygen or no oxygen, when there is low oxygen or no oxygen means there is very less amount of oxygen or there is completely no oxygen, organisms produce different compounds in the respiration process. For example, if you take the bacteria, in the bacteria, during if the respiration takes place in the absence of oxygen, that we called as anaerobic respiration. Respiration actually two types. If it takes place in the presence of oxygen, it is aerobic respiration. If it takes place in the absence of oxygen, it we called as anaerobic respiration. The anaerobic respiration occurs in all lower organisms like bacteria and yeast, but the products are different. If it occurs in bacteria, it releases both lactic acid and energy. And if it occurs in the yeast cells, it produces ethanol, carbon dioxide and energy. Even chemically, we call this particular step is also as fermentation. So maybe you already heard about in the baking industries, even in alcohol industries, yeast was used. Yeast cells convert the glucose into ethanol plus CO2 plus energy. This process, conversion of sugar or glucose into alcohol in the absence of oxygen, we called as fermentation. Fermentation is also one type of anaerobic respiration. Fermentation plays very important role in bakeries and beverage industries, means production of alcohols. So because of that CO2 released by yeast cells only, making to rise in duff, means the baking industry. Even ethanol is nothing but ethyl alcohol, which is nothing but one type of alcohol. Then even our body, for example, even athletes or sports persons, they are taking vigorous exercises. So even at normal state, our body cells uses oxygen only for the production of energy. But during vigorous exercise or during running for long time, what is the oxygen we are supplied to our body cells is not sufficient to produce that much energy. So obviously our body cells at that particular period, they shifted to another type of respiration we called as anaerobic respiration. So especially muscle cells in our body during vigorous exercise, they produce a chemical compound known as lactic acid. So most of time after vigorous exercise or after running, obviously you feel your muscle pains, or just you thought that I am very tired and I already suffered with pains. So why we feel that muscular pains means at that time, because of less oxygen supplied to our body, lactic acid compound is accumulated in our muscles. It lead to the muscular pain. But at that time, if you just rest for some time, when again there is oxygen is sufficient, that lactic acid will be dissolved again and just we get relief. That's only the reason. And here to prove the anaerobic respiration in yeast cells, in your textbook one important activity is given. It is very important either in competitive wise or even your SSC examination. In the yeast experiment, first we heat the glucose solution, and after that we immediately cooled it. Why we are doing like that means to remove the oxygen present in the glucose solution. After that we add some amount of yeast, and so that oxygen was removed from that cells. Why? Because we are removing oxygen means here we want to do the test in the anaerobic conditions. That's why remove oxygen. In that we use a special dye, means one color giving agent we are using, that name was diazine green or Janus green bee. In the yeast experiment we use the dye diazine green or Janus green bee. If there is no oxygen, very short amount of oxygen is present, that diazine green bee dye turns its color from blue to the pink. So based on that we confirm that there is a short supply of oxygen. Then based on their body size and based on the availability of water and the type of the circulatory system what they have, different organisms develop the different respiratory systems. For example, a unicellular organism like amoeba, even multicellular organisms like hydra and planaria, they simply diffuse the gases by using their body surface. These all are very important actually. Unicellular amoeba and multicellular hydra and planaria, they don't have special respiratory organs. The gases diffuse into their body by the body surface. Then coming to fish, it is aquatic animal, it is completely lives in water. That's why it uses gills as their respiratory organs. The respiration which occurs by using gills we called as bronchial respiration. What we call bronchial respiration. So the fish having gills and gill lamella, these completely bathed in the water, and the exchange of gases takes place between the gills and their blood capillaries. That respiration we called as bronchial respiration. And coming to insects, either cockroach, grasshopper, and most of the insect, the type of respiration we called as tracheal respiration. What we call tracheal respiration. These insects throughout their body contain a series of tubes we called as actually trachea. At the sides of their body they are having small pores or holes. These holes or pores we called as spiracles. Through that spiracles, how the air into our body entered through the nostrils, in the insects air from outside entered through the spiracles and entered into a tubes known as trachea. That type of respiration we called as tracheal respiration. And The animals like frog, earthworm, leech, these all in that the gas exchange takes place through skin. Such type of respiration we call as cutaneous respiration. But remaining all reptiles, all birds, mammals including humans, we have well developed respiratory organs known as lungs. So the respiration we call as pulmonary respiration. So if the respiration occurs through the gills, we call as bronchial respiration. It occurs through trachea, it is known as tracheal respiration, takes place in all insects. If sometimes he asked in the bit, what are the respiratory organs in cockroach, means trachea. What is the type of respiration in grasshopper, means tracheal respiration. Organ is the trachea, that organ we termed as trachea, and the type of respiration we called as tracheal respiration. And here, if the organ, here the respiratory organ is skin, we called that as cutaneous respiration. Cutaneous respiration occurs in earthworm, leech, even frog also. Here a frog is a special case. It utilizes both skin and lungs for its respiration purpose. Means in the frog both, and it means it is amphibian, it able to live in the water, at the same time it live on the land. So based on the condition where it live, it uses its respiratory organs. So in the frog, here the frog, just remember, very important, in the frog both cutaneous and pulmonary respiration also takes place. And so if the respiration occurs through lungs, what we call that respiration is pulmonary respiration. So these are the different respiratory organs in the animals. Coming to plants, so plants does not have special respiratory organs. You already aware of that. The stomata are the, through the stomata mostly the gas exchange takes place in the plants. Coming to plants, the stomata means the small pores present in the leaves. Through the stomata gas exchange takes place, but along with stomata, a lenticels, a loose connective tissue present on the stem, and even surface of roots also plays a role in the gas exchange or respiration process in the plants. But generally through the roots, the plant take the air which is present between the soil particles. But if the plants are live in the marshy lands or wet areas, the spaces between the soil are filled with the water instead of air. So that areas we marshy lands we called actually. So the plants which are growing in that we called as mangrove plants. So to avoid the respiration, to avoid the amount of to avoid the loss of air, these mangrove plants develop a special roots called as aerial roots. Means actually remaining all plants roots are situated below the ground, but these aerial roots projected out of the soil and they simply take the atmospheric air. So mangrove plants contain a special roots known as aerial roots, and most of the plants using stomata, lenticels and surface of roots. Thank you children.